G'day guys and welcome. Today I'd like to show you how to apply the white color coat for the Gundam Barbatos Lupus using Gundam Mr Color paints. Introducing today's special guest star, MS White by Mr Color Gundam Color. This bottle's brand new, but I still give it a quick mix with my wave paint stirrer. Quick tip, please be careful not to get paint on the top of the jar. When you re-screw the lid on, it will dry and you'll get flakes into your paint. Give your paint stirrer a quick spin in some tool cleaner and a wipe before the paint dries for a very easy clean. Nothing fancy, going straight with the MS White from the bottle and applying it here to one of the wings. Showing you here at normal speed, you can see I went with a hand brush primer that you can see in the previous video, and it has some great advantages in that it's very accurate, so I only place paint where I wanted it to be. Now, one of the downsides to, say, using an airbrush or a rattle can base coat in this instance is that it's a little bit soft, so I'm taking a little bit extra care here. To not disturb it too much, you don't want to pull it up, but just enough to create that shadow under look that we want, and to leave a little bit poking through to create some visual interest and effects on the surface, paint showing up through the white. Here I'm using the long axis of the brush. It's to allow for a vertical vector component to the paint, so that it gives some direction. It's a technique from 2D painting and applied to the model, but it helps to lay down some brush strokes. Now, brush strokes are not an evil thing. We always talk about, wow, I can't see brush strokes on your model. In fact, my brush strokes are often very visible, but I've laid them in a way so as to create an effect. So with this, the wings are a very stylish component of this mecha. So we want them to give it a movement vector and to help give an illusion of speed even when it's standing still. Here's a quick technique point. I try to start swinging the brush sometimes before it comes in contact with the model, to allow it to just touch enough to lay down a light layer of paint without bothering the undersurfaces too much. Quick resupply of thinner from my custom-made shaker bottle, and finally our main guy Lupus makes an appearance. You can see another vector that I was talking about here. Here I went with a diagonal vector. This feature, it seems to be like a design feature of this suit. So I kicked off there, and it just happens to be an upper facing part of the model that's very easy to show the technique. Now, it's right about this stage of painting where I start asking myself, why did I choose white? And it's an amazing color once we're finished, but the process is tough. I'm not going to try to trick you on that one. I'll be totally honest. You do need to do more work to make white look good, and that first starts off here with applying multiple thinnish layers. Now, I tried to keep it relatively thick because it's a great quality paint for one, but you don't want to be, it's a trade-off between going too thin, and if you have too much thinner in your paint, it will reactivate the underlayer of red-brown, because you can see it here. When my paint's a little thinner, that's when you can see I'm pulling up more undercoat. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, you can use it in subsequent steps, but you also, it's making a rod for your back. You don't want to be reworking it too much as well. So keeping a happy medium between thin paint that does the job versus thick paint that tends to obscure detail too much. Now, it's not too difficult to do. It's just a practice thing. After a couple of models of doing this, you'll be fine. Here I'd like to make mention of, painting the model as a whole. It does have some wonderful advantages. We can get a good overall feel for how we want this to look when we're finished. But as you can see, I've got wet edges on my model. Some of these places aren't dry yet. So I will admit, I often do fingerprint my models. Now, it's not a completely bad thing, but it is one of the downsides that I find I do with my roughness in handling models. But that does bring me to a technique point I can share. You can see here that I'm holding the brush relatively far away from the ferrule and far away from the paint head of the brush, and I'm not choked up on it. If you have the baseball analogy, I'm holding it way down the bat, and it's just it's a comfort thing. Right now, I'm not choked up and working in tight for details. I'm laid back, and this is a relaxing thing, to be honest. I'm just working to get coverage. we can tighten this model up as we move forward in the process. In the beginning of the process, we're working with to make an art analogy, we're working with a broad canvas, and we start out rough and we tighten towards the end. Now, this runs completely opposite to the way many people are shown how to make models. And we're shown to start with a really tight start, such as a perfect airbrush start, and then gradually work and loosening up the finish. Now, that's not to say it's not right. That's a perfectly fine way to do it, but it does run contrary to how art has always been done, from caveman times until the Renaissance painters and what have you. We've always worked with I say we, like I'm including myself with those people, but I mean we as artists, we've always worked loosely at first and then tightening up towards the end. And that's something I've tried to bring together with my finishing techniques and strategy process for plastic models, is start loose, finish tight. And I find that way I can fine-tune my finish a lot better and go after a more artistic and pleasing result. Back to the actual model, here you can still see I'm using the large brush, but coming in for more detailed areas, I do let the paint thicken up just slightly because it will run in these areas that have tighter details. Coming back for another session, and here's one of the things that really shines about this process, is that it has a really good start-stop methodology, and that I can come back, pour some thinner into my paint dish, reactivate it, and I'm ready and off to go. Here you can see I've come down in brush size. This is a medium round sable, I believe. It was a brush given to me for use in an article, because we have to show the products that we're talking about. The white here is really starting to firm up. I'm getting a decent amount of coverage, and here it becomes not so much a process of coverage, but as not covering it up too much. You have to keep an eye on it to cover it enough so that it doesn't look terrible, and like a poorly brush painted model, up to a point where you're not making it a completely solid white finish, because you can do that, but all of that work that you've done is pretty much for nothing if you just cover it over. So learning when to stop. This is something that Yokoyama-san, Ko Yokoyama sensei, that I learned from him. Now, by trade, he's an illustrator. That's how he makes his main living, before the Maschinen Krieger property took off for him. And it's a tough business. They need to produce high quality art in a short period of time. And he mentioned it, he explained it in a way that, if given enough time, anybody can produce good work. And I thought, well, that was very motivating and empowering for me, because I was a beginner at the time. But it wasn't only that. He said, look, to be good, you've got to produce good work quickly, because, as a professional, if you don't produce things quickly, you'll starve. Now, I've not always worked at this with the end in mind of being a professional, but there's certainly something to that for us, in that, producing even our hobby work quickly as we can to a suitable standard, it certainly doesn't hurt us, because it gives us plenty of time to use on other activities. Please let me know if this sort of content is of interest to you, because I can stay strictly to the model if that's what's more important, or but what I've found in my process and journey with being a professional modeler in Japan is that it's the process and the philosophy that I've learned from working with these people that has really been a game changer for me. The way I look at models, the way I think about the process, has been way more important than a couple of hacks and processes. They help, but it's the overlying principles that have really helped me. So, if that's of interest to you, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to work that in between the hacks and processes that I'm happy to share with you. Thanks. Now back to painting our white base coat and our base color coat. You can see it's solidifying up here. We're starting to get pretty good coverage, and it's looking a lot better. This is one of the things that I had to steel myself through the process to be mentally strong, because even this model, I will admit, despite having made so many and painted white so many times, there was that halfway process between covering up the red brown with white, that it just looked terrible. And that moment of self-doubt creeps in and you think to yourself, this is not going to work out. But like a life lesson, you just need to, stick your head down, keep that brush moving, keep applying a little bit of white here and there, working on the coats as I'm showing here. And it reaches a critical mass of white that you kind of suddenly you say to yourself, hey, this doesn't look too bad, and I might just pull this one off again. And I'm starting to pull the model apart now, getting into some of the finer details and working with so many wet edges. That's the best thing about leaving these models articulated, is that I can pull it apart, I can paint and focus on focusing on the details. And then after a few minutes of letting it dry, we can snap it back together for a quick check of how our progress is going. Zooming into some detail painting here, you can see I'm finally using the pointy end of the brush, and I'm keeping it moving pretty quickly. But here's a time when, I'd say I'm about 50% into my process here, and it starts making sense to be a little bit more neat. The trade-off between being neat and keeping it loose and tightening it up and not having to redo mistakes is at about this stage of the process where I'm mindful of not being sloppy. But as you do more and more models with your brush, you'll get a lot better at it, you'll get a lot more control. And you can see here, if you look at it, I'm not making a lot of errors. I'm quick, but our hands are made for this kind of work. We become quite dexterous, and it's just a skill that you'll pick up over time, giving it a bit of practice. But having a process like this where we can recover from our mistakes, it leads itself to getting better with brushwork, because you can work with a lot more confidence. You're not worried about so much. You can't ruin this model by making one or two small errors. Now, as if magically on cue, here I am recovering from a mistake. I swear that happened just by chance, but I clean off the brush, I reshape it, and I quickly clean the area that I've made a mistake with a damp brush, and it comes off pretty easily. Don't use it with too much thinner, because you'll reactivate the underlayers and that can turn it into a mess. But I've just quickly gone over it, added a bit more thinner to my paint, and quickly moving on to building up some paint on the inner layers of the body chassis here. And this part was, I really started to enjoy the design of this model in here. It's got some really cool design features built in here, a nice level of detail. If you've seen the first video in this one where I put down the red-brown base coat, you'll see that it was a complete failure in that you couldn't see it on the color of the plastic. So in partial redemption, here I am putting MS Grey from Gundam Mr Color directly onto the red-brown base coat, propeller color base coat, and it's slightly more visible here, thankfully. And this is normal speed, just to give you an idea. I call this, I dance the brush across the surface. You can still see there's plenty of darkness poking through, because I want the mace, this thing's called it's his Lupus battle mace, I want it to be really beat up looking, because this is the thing that he's whacking people in the head with. It should not be pristine. Now usually I would recommend you just paint one side at a time and lay it out while it dries, but while the paint was good and the camera was running, I wanted to zip through this as quickly as possible. Painting with grey is a lot of fun. I mean, it covers really well, it's really easy, you can't really mess it up, and I shouldn't say that or I'll be showing you a recovery again, but and you can see here I'm well back off the brush, and just zooming it along, it's almost as if grey paints itself. And lovely to work with. The mace doesn't have much in the way. It's got a seam running up the length of it, but it doesn't have much in the way of places for paint to pool. So I'm considering using this in particular to run some weathering tests on. So please look forward to that. That'll be in the next video. Finally onto the red, and I'll admit I was really looking forward to doing this. With the military type schemes that I usually work with, and with the Maschinen Krieger property, there's not a lot of bright red. Looking at the box artwork though, the red is it's a darker red, and the plastic is very bright Ferrari type red. So here I'm tuning it a little bit using some of the propeller color that was left over from the basing stage. Just to give it a slightly darker tone, we can work with it. Vertical vectors here on the feet. I'm letting this thin paint rework the underlayer here, because I do want the feet, my plan is to make the feet relatively dirty. because I'd like to establish a color gradient as possible, just like you do in a Photoshop type painting, with it heavily weathered from the bottom and gradually getting less weathered towards the top. That performs a number of tasks for us. It makes it just visually interesting to look at, and you'd imagine with these are about 20 meters tall if they were real, so it makes them a bit more realistic and fun. And but making it entertaining for our eyes to look at is the main thing I'm after. You know, I'd like to look at this when I'm finished and say, hey, that looks pretty cool. This is the first time I've worked with one of the Mr Color bright reds, and much like other brands of red paint, the pigment is of low opacity, low coverage power. I think that's just a deal with red pigments. On a technique note, you can see I'm getting all of my fingers in there to support and make sure that it's not wobbling anymore. Red is a pretty powerful color. Like, it goes against what I've just said. Red pigments, they don't seem to give you a good opacity, a good coverage power, but if you get them on something you don't want them on, they seem to have a hell of a lot of coverage power. So I don't want any mistakes with red. I want to keep it relatively as clean as possible, especially because I'm painting it around white. It will stain the white, so, you know, heads up, just be careful with that. In the same way that I toned down the red, here I am tuning up the blue, putting it in over the top of the white paint palette that I was using previously. It was a beautiful cobalt blue, wonderful to work with, and when I wanted to highlight it, I just dug deeper into my palette to reactivate the white, and then I did a quick edge paint with it, and that was it, it was done. Here's a quick preview of what the model looks like after a couple of easy weathering steps, and I'll be covering them in the next video with you. Please consider subscribing. I don't want you to miss out on the content, and look forward to sharing this with you. Thanks very much. Bye.